The screen door of the ranch house cracked hard against its frame as Kate Keller pushed through it without knocking, a folded paper gripped so tightly in her gloved hand that the creases had gone white. August Underwood came up from the table fast, one hand already dropping toward the pistol he kept on a peg by the window, and for a moment the two of them simply stood there measuring each other across the room, strangers in the same doorway of the same disputed life. "This is my father's land," Kate said, before he could ask who she was or how she'd gotten past his dog and his fence line. "I have the deed right here, filed and witnessed in Austin 4 years ago, and I would like to know how you came to be sitting at his table." August did not reach for the gun again. He looked at her the way a man looks at whether he cannot yet read, uncertain whether it will pass or break over him. He was tall, sun-darkened, somewhere in his early 30s, with a quiet stillness to him that struck her more than any bluster would have. "Ma'am, I do not know who your father was," he said, "but I bought this ranch fair and square from the land office in Larkspur 3 years back, paid every dollar of it, and I have worked this ground since. If you have got a deed, I have got one too, and I expect we had better look at them side by side before either of us says whose table this is." It was the reasonableness of it that unsettled her more than anger would have. She had ridden 2 days from Austin expecting to find a squatter, a thief, perhaps a drunk who had wandered onto empty land and claimed it out of laziness. She had not expected a man who spoke evenly, who did not raise his voice, who set down the coffee pot instead of throwing it. She unfolded the deed anyway and laid it on the table between them, smoothing it flat with 2 fingers. "Thomas Keller," she said, "my father. He homesteaded this section in 1876 and proved up on it in 79. This is the patent, signed by the register of the land office in Larkspur, and this is my letter of inheritance from the probate court in Austin, dated this past March, after he died." August's jaw tightened at that, some private calculation working behind his eyes. He went to a strongbox beneath the window seat and came back with his own paper, and when he set it beside hers, the 2 documents lay there like a challenge neither of them had invited. "Cyrus Prout sold me this section," he said. "Told me the previous claim had lapsed, that the man who held it had died without heirs and the land had reverted to the government. I paid the homestead fee and the recording charge same as anybody. I have got no reason to lie to you, and considering you are standing in my kitchen with a shotgun's worth of nerve and no weapon I can see, I do not think you are lying either." Kate studied him. 6 weeks of grief and 6 weeks of half-formed suspicion had worn a hard edge onto her, and she was not in the habit of trusting men who found themselves suddenly and conveniently in possession of dead men's property. But something in the calm insistence of him, the plainness of his account, made her hesitate before she said what she had come prepared to say. "Then one of these papers is a lie," she said instead, "and I intend to find out which one and who wrote it." August looked at her a long moment, and something that was almost relief moved across his face, though she could not have said why relief would visit a man who stood to lose a ranch. "Then we had better ride into Larkspur," he said, "and ask Cyrus Prout why he sold a dead man's land to a stranger without so much as a notice in the county paper." She had come to accuse him. She left instead riding beside him, both of them uneasy allies bound by the same unanswered question, and neither one of them yet willing to say that the other had impressed them. The ride to Larkspur took the better part of an hour, the trail crowded that morning with the dust and bawling of a passing herd. 3,000 head or more moving north along the spur of the western trail that ran past the town on its way toward the Red River crossings and the railheads beyond. Drovers hollered at strays and touched their hats to Kate as she passed, and she was aware, not for the first time, of how few women rode this road alone, and how many men assumed a woman traveling it must be lost or foolish or someone's wife. She had learned to let them assume what they liked. It made for easier passage. Larkspur itself was a raw, growing town, its main street lined with a mercantile, 2 saloons, a hotel with a new false front still smelling of fresh paint. And at the far end, the squat stone building of the Larkspur Trust and Cattle Bank, chartered 3 years before under the National Bank Act, its brass plate polished bright enough to catch the morning sun. Cyrus Prout kept his land office in a smaller frame building beside it, and it was there that August tied his horse first, his face set in the particular patience of a man who has learned that pushing too hard only makes officials dig in their heels. Prout was a narrow man with ink-stained fingers and the nervous courtesy of someone who has spent years learning to smile at people he intends to disappoint. He listened to Kate's account with his eyes sliding sideways toward the window more than once, and when she finished, he cleared his throat and reached for a ledger of his own, flipping pages with exaggerated care. "I recorded the section as reverted," he said. "That was the information given to me." "Given to you by whom?" Kate asked. Prout's throat worked. "The bank," he said finally. "Mr. Underwood's purchase money passed through the bank's trust account, same as all our land transactions do. The examiner who came through that season, he was the one who certified the prior claim had lapsed. I only recorded what I was told was true." "What examiner?" Kate said, though she already felt the cold certainty of the answer settling into her stomach before he spoke it. "Mr. Warren Ledbetter," Prout said. "National Bank examiner out of the Comptroller's office. He comes through Larkspur twice a year to audit the bank's books. A very thorough man." He said thorough the way a man says dangerous when he does not wish to be overheard. Kate had heard the name before. Not here, not in Larkspur, but in Waco, and before that in a smaller town on the Brazos, in the mouths of ranchers who had lost land to sudden, unexplained liens and merchants whose credit had evaporated overnight after Ledbetter's visits. She had been chasing that name for the better part of a year, filling a private ledger of her own with dates and figures and half-confirmed rumors, never quite able to catch the man doing anything a court would credit. She had come to Larkspur first for her father's land. She understood now, standing in Cyrus Prout's overheated office with August Underwood's shoulder a careful foot from hers, that she had also, without entirely meaning to, arrived at the center of the story she had been writing toward for a year. "He is due back in Larkspur within the week," Prout added, when neither of them spoke, "to close out this season's audit. Then I will be here when he comes," Kate said. August looked at her sideways as they left the land office, the noon sun hard and white on the packed dirt of the street. "You did not come here just for the ranch," he said. "It was not quite a question." "No," Kate admitted. "I write for a newspaper in Austin. I have been following a pattern of land I could not explain, families losing claims that should have been safe, on the say-so of one traveling examiner nobody thinks to question, because he carries a federal commission in his coat pocket. My father wrote to me 2 months before he died. He said he had found something in the bank's books that troubled him. 3 weeks after that letter, he was found at the bottom of a ravine with his horse dead beside him, and Sheriff Bragg called it a fall." August was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again his voice had lost some of its earlier caution. "I am sorry for your father," he said, and it did not sound like the thing men said because manners required it. "And I think you had better tell me plainly what it is you suspect, because if there is fraud sitting behind the sale of this ranch, it is my name on the paper too, and I would rather know what I am standing in before the ground gives way." They spoke through it standing in the shade of the mercantile's awning while trail hands drifted past them toward the saloon, and by the time they had finished, an understanding had settled between them that neither one named aloud. Whatever the truth of the land turned out to be, they were not, for the moment, enemies. Kate took a room at the Larkspur Hotel that night, and it was there, past midnight, unable to sleep for the noise of drovers still celebrating their pay in the street below, that she opened her father's ledger by lamplight and began, for the 100th time, to read his last entries. The handwriting grew tighter toward the end, more crabbed, as if he had been writing quickly, afraid of being interrupted. "Land office records do not match bank trust ledger," one line read. WL visited twice this month. No audit scheduled. Ask Kay to look at figures when she comes. She had cried the first time she found that line, imagining her father setting aside a question for a daughter he would not live to ask it of. She did not cry now. She copied the figures into her own notebook, page by careful page, and resolved that when Warren Ledbetter arrived in Larkspur, she would be waiting with more than suspicion in her hands. He came 4 days later, on a bay gelding with a good deal more polish than sense, wearing a gray suit entirely wrong for the dust of a cattle town, and carrying himself with the particular ease of a man who has never once been asked to prove himself honest. Kate watched him from the hotel porch as he crossed to the bank, and something in the unhurried confidence of his walk told her more than Pruett's nervous testimony had. She gave it 2 days, letting him settle into his audit, letting the bank's cashier grow used to seeing her about, a woman with a newspaper letter of introduction and a claim to verify, nothing more alarming than that. On the second evening, when the bank had closed and the street outside had gone quiet but for the distant lowing of a herd bedded down south of town, she saw the lamp still burning in the back office window, and she saw Warren Ledbetter's shadow moving behind the glass long after any honest audit should have ended for the night. She left her father's ledger with the bank's cashier that afternoon at Ledbetter's own polite request, so that he might verify a figure against the trust account before their scheduled meeting the next morning. It had seemed reasonable at the time. Standing in the alley behind the bank in the blue dark, watching that lamp burn, she understood with sudden, sick clarity that she had handed the wolf her own throat to examine. The back door was unlocked, carelessness or arrogance, she never afterward decided which. She went in on quiet feet, past the teller's cage, down the short hallway to the office where the lamp burned, and there she found Warren Ledbetter bent over her father's ledger with a fine steel pen in hand, carefully working a new line into the entries beneath her father's own faded ink, his face set in the mild concentration of a man doing careful, familiar work. "Mr. Ledbetter," Kate said, and her voice did not shake, though her heart was going hard enough that she could feel it in her throat. He straightened without haste and set the pen down with the unhurried calm of a man closing a business ledger at the end of an ordinary day. "Miss Keller," he said, "you are up late. That is my father's ledger. It is a record belonging to the estate of Thomas Keller, currently under my examination," Ledbetter said. "I am entering a notation regarding an outstanding note against the property, satisfied by transfer of title in 1880, purely a formality." "There was no note," Kate said. "I have read every page of that book a dozen times over. My father owed nothing on that land, and you know it, because you are inventing the debt as I stand here." Something shifted in Ledbetter's face then, a small, cold recalculation, the look of a man deciding how much a witness is worth silencing and how much trouble that silencing would cost him. He did not reach for a weapon. He was too careful for that in a bank at night, with the door unlocked. Instead, he closed the ledger gently and set his hand flat upon the cover, as though he could hold the truth shut by will alone. "You are a long way from Austin, Miss Keller," he said. "And you are alone in a bank after hours, which is a curious position for a lady with a newspaper's letter of introduction to explain to Sheriff Bragg should it come to that. I would think carefully before you accuse a federal examiner of anything at all. My commission comes from Washington. Yours comes from a printing press in Austin that will not follow you into a Texas courtroom." "I saw you," Kate said, "with my own eyes. That will follow me anywhere I go." She did not wait to hear his answer. She stepped forward, snatched the ledger from beneath his hand before he could stop her, and was out the back door and into the alley before he had fully risen from his chair, his voice calling something behind her that she did not stay to hear. She ran the length of the alley and out onto the street, her breath tearing, the ledger clutched to her chest like a child she had pulled from a fire, and she did not stop running until she reached the ranch house on the edge of town, where August Underwood's lamp still burned against the dark. He was on his feet before she had finished pounding on the door, gun in hand out of old habit, and when he saw her face, he set the gun down on the table without being asked and reached for her instead, steadying her by the shoulders while she caught her breath enough to speak. "He was altering it," she said, "right in front of me, forging a debt against my father's estate to make it look as though the land transfer to you was a legitimate settlement instead of a fraud. He as good as told me. He thinks no one will believe me over a man with a federal commission." August's face had gone very still, the stillness she was coming to recognize as the shape his anger took when he did not wish to frighten her with it. "Then he knows you have seen him," he said, "and a man like that does not leave a witness standing if he can help it. You cannot go back to that hotel tonight. I have nowhere else." "You have my barn," August said, "and a good deal more honor than that suggests, if you will trust me enough to accept it. I will sleep in the yard if it eases your mind. But I am not sending you back into town alone tonight, not with what you are carrying in your arms." She looked at him for a long moment in the lamplight, this stranger she had ridden out to accuse of theft not a week before, and found that she believed him without effort, the way she had not quite let herself believe anyone since her father's letter had stopped coming. "The barn will do," she said, "so long as you are not too proud to share the coffee in the morning." Something that was almost a smile crossed his face, brief and startled, as though he had not expected to find room for one that night. "I have never once been too proud for coffee," he said, "and I do not intend to start now." She slept little, but what sleep she found was easier than any she had had since her father's funeral, knowing there was a man awake in the yard between her and whatever the night might send. The night sent nothing in the end, but the morning brought Sheriff Otis Bragg riding out to the ranch before Kate had finished her coffee, his badge catching the early light, his face arranged in an expression of official regret that did not reach his eyes. "Miss Keller," he said, not dismounting, "I have had a complaint from Mr. Ledbetter that you entered the bank without permission last night and made off with property belonging to an estate under federal examination. I am obliged to ask you to return it." "The ledger belongs to my father's estate," Kate said, standing on the porch with the book still tucked beneath her arm where it had not left her side since morning. "I am the sole heir. I have every right to it, and Mr. Ledbetter has no right at all to be altering entries in a dead man's business records to manufacture a debt that never existed." Bragg's mouth thinned. "That is a serious accusation against a federal officer." "It is a true one," Kate said, "and I will prove it, with the ledger in hand and every page dated in my father's own writing beside whatever fresh ink Mr. Ledbetter has added since. If you would like to examine it here in daylight in front of witnesses, I am happy to oblige. I do not think Mr. Ledbetter will be so eager." August had come to stand beside her on the porch, saying nothing, but his presence alone seemed to give Bragg pause, the sheriff's eyes flicking to him with a wariness that struck Kate as odd for a man supposedly in the right. "I will need to speak with Mr. Ledbetter about this," Bragg said finally, gathering his reins. "In the meantime, Miss Keller, I would suggest you take care where you go alone in this town. Larkspur is a rough place come summer, with all the trail traffic through it. A woman on her own can come to grief without anybody meaning her particular harm." It was not a threat, not quite, but it sat in the air like one long after Bragg had ridden back toward town, and Kate found she was shaking slightly, though she had not let it show while he watched. "He is one of them," August said quietly, watching the dust of the sheriff's departure. "Bought or frightened, I do not know which, but he did not come out here for the good of Warren Ledbetter's paperwork. He came to see how much you know, and to warn you off before you learn more." "Then we had better learn more quickly than he expects," Kate said. It was August who told her the rest of it that afternoon, sitting across the kitchen table with the ledger between them, the fraudulent entry in Ledbetter's careful hand glaring up at both of them like an open wound. He had been turning something over since the sheriff's visit. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, and when he finally spoke, his voice had the flat, careful quality of a man laying down a burden he has carried a long way alone. "I know the man who runs the gang that works Comanche Notch," he said. The one that takes toll off every trail crew and freight wagon that comes through the only safe pass into this valley, and pays Bragg and men like Leadbitter to look the other way while they do it. His name is Silas Rourke. I rode with him once, a long time ago, under a different name than the one you know me by." Kate went very still. "I was 19 when I fell in with that outfit," August went on, not looking at her now, his eyes fixed on some point past her shoulder. "Cattle rustling mostly, some low robbery, up in the Indian Territory and along the Kansas line. I never killed a man, I want you to know that plainly, but I stood watch while others did worse, and I took my share of money that was never mine to take. When the gang broke apart after a robbery went bad and 2 men hanged for it, I rode south, changed my name from Wade Coburn to August Underwood, and I have spent every year since trying to be a man worth the name I chose. I bought this ranch honest, with money I earned honest, driving cattle for other men for 6 years before I ever thought I could afford land of my own. But if Rourke is behind whatever Leadbitter is doing to your father's ledger, then he knows my old face, and he has known it, I would guess, since before I ever bought this section. I do not think it is chance that put me on land next to the only pass into this valley." Kate sat with that for a long moment, feeling the shape of it settle into place. "You think Rourke arranged for you to buy this ranch?" "I think a man with a quiet, reformed reputation, sitting on land that overlooks the mouth of Comanche Notch, makes a convenient neighbor for a gang that wants no curious eyes on its toll road," August said. "I do not know it for certain. But I have wondered, more nights than I would like to admit, why Cyrus Prout sold this parcel so cheap, and why nobody in 3 years has ever come to dispute my claim to it, until you rode up with a deed that says the whole sale was built on a lie." "You could have told me nothing of this," Kate said quietly. "I would likely never have learned it." "I could have," August agreed. "But you have trusted me with a good deal these last few days, sleeping in my barn, riding beside me into town, and I find I would rather you knew the worst of me from my own mouth than have Rourke or Leadbitter hand it to you dressed up as a weapon against me later. If you mean to write about this, about all of it, you should write it true, even the parts that shame me." She reached across the table then, an instinct more than a decision, and laid her hand briefly over his. "I do not think a man who tells the truth about his own worst years, unasked, is the same man who once rode with Silas Rourke," she said. "I think you have been paying for that mistake for a long time already, and I am not in the business of collecting debts twice paid." August's hand turned beneath hers, just slightly, enough that their fingers brushed properly instead of merely touching, and neither of them moved away for a long moment, the ledger and its forged lie forgotten between them on the table. "We should not," he said finally, low, though he made no move to prove it. "Not with Bragg riding out here making threats, not with Leadbitter knowing your face and mine both now. It would be a poor time to lose my head over you." "A poor time," Kate agreed, and did not take her hand away. It was a shot through the kitchen window, 3 nights later, that ended the conversation neither of them had quite finished having. The bullet struck the lamp on the shelf rather than either of them, more warning than assassination. But the glass shattered, and the room went dark, and August had Kate on the floor behind the overturned table before the echo of the shot had finished rolling off across the yard. He came up with his rifle in hand, moving to the window with the economy of a man who had once made his living by exactly this kind of danger, and fired twice into the dark toward the tree line where the muzzle flash had come from. Whoever had fired did not return the fire. A horse's hooves receded fast into the night, and then there was only the ringing quiet and Kate's own breath loud in her ears. "You are not hurt," August said, dropping down beside her, his hands moving over her shoulders and arms in the dark with a rough, careful urgency that had nothing to do with propriety and everything to do with terror only just beginning to ebb. "I am not hurt," Kate confirmed, and found her voice was steadier than she had expected. "That was a message, not an attempt." "It was both," August said grimly. "A message that the next one will not miss, and an attempt to see how badly you frighten." We cannot stay here waiting for Rourke to decide the second shot is worth the trouble of Bragg's paperwork. They did not sleep again that night. By lamplight from a second, unbroken lamp, they laid out on the kitchen table everything Kate had gathered: her father's ledger, her own notebook of a year's investigation, the forged entry in Ledbetter's hand, and between them they built the shape of the thing whole for the first time. A bank examiner using his federal commission to travel between small Texas towns, falsifying trust accounts and land records to funnel ranches and grazing rights toward buyers friendly to Silas Rourke's gang, while Rourke's riders collected toll from every cattle drive and freight wagon that dared use Comanche Notch, the only safe road into the valley during the crowded traffic of early summer, with Sheriff Bragg paid handsomely to see nothing and hear less. "It is not enough to know it," Kate said, staring at the papers spread before her. "Bragg will not act against Ledbetter, and Prude is too frightened to speak against either of them. We need someone outside Larkspur entirely, someone Rourke's money has not reached. The controller of the currency has a regional office in Fort Worth, and there is a United States marshal posted there as well, with jurisdiction that Bragg's badge cannot touch." "Fort Worth is 2 days' hard ride," August said, "and every mile of the direct road runs through Comanche Notch. Rourke will have men watching that pass day and night, especially now, with the herds moving through and toll money coming in thick. If he knows what we are carrying, he will not let us reach it easily." "Then we go carefully," Kate said, "and we go together because I do not think either one of us can carry this alone and arrive with it intact." They set out 2 mornings later, before first light, saddlebags packed with the ledger and Kate's notebook wrapped in oilcloth against the weather, both of them dressed for hard riding, Kate in a split canvas skirt that let her sit her horse astride rather than side, a practicality she had adopted years before over the objections of every proper lady she had ever known. The morning was already warm with the promise of a hot Texas June, the dust of a trail herd visible far off to the east where drovers pushed their cattle north toward the crossing at the Red River. And for the first hour the ride felt almost ordinary, 2 travelers on a common road. The feeling did not last past the mouth of Comanche Notch. The pass narrowed there between 2 steep shoulders of red rock, the trail dropping into shadow even as the sun climbed, and it was in that shadow, not a quarter mile past the entrance, that 4 riders came out from behind the rocks on either side and blocked the road front and back, rifles already raised, before either Kate or August had time to do more than draw rein. "Well now," said the man at the front, a lean, gray-mustached rider with a bad-shaped scar of old sunburn where a star must once have sat on his vest, though he wore no badge now. "Wade Coburn, it has been a good long while." "Rourke," August said, and his voice had gone flat and careful, the voice, Kate understood suddenly, of a man speaking to someone he had once feared and had never entirely stopped fearing. "I heard you took up ranching," Rourke said, walking his horse a few steps closer, his eyes moving from August to Kate and the saddlebags across her horse's withers with an interest that made her skin crawl. "I heard, too, that you have got yourself tangled up with a newspaper woman who has been asking questions about my friend Mr. Ledbetter's bookkeeping. That was not a wise thing to do, old friend. I would have thought you learned caution better than that. All those years I kept you alive." "You kept nobody alive but yourself," August said. "I have not been Wade Coburn in 9 years, and I will not answer to it now. Let us pass, Silas. Whatever is in those bags is federal business, and killing us over it will bring more trouble down on you than it is worth." Rourke laughed, an easy, unhurried sound that carried no real humor in it. "Killing was never my first thought," he said. "I would rather have those bags without the trouble of a body to explain. Toss them down, and you and the lady can ride on to Fort Worth with my compliments, and tell whoever you like whatever story you please. Without proof, a woman's word against a federal examiner's commission is not going to trouble Silas Rourke." Kate felt the truth of it settle cold in her stomach even as August's hand moved, slow and deliberate, toward the rifle in his saddle scabbard. There was no clean way through this. 4 rifles against 1, in a pass Rourke's men had chosen precisely because it left no room to run. It was August who broke the stillness, and not with the rifle. He drove his heels into his horse's flanks and cut hard left, off the trail entirely, toward a break in the rock wall that Kate would have sworn a moment before was solid stone, shouting her name as he went, and she did not waste breath asking why before she followed, her horse scrambling up a narrow, brush-choked defile that climbed steeply away from the main pass. Behind them, gunfire cracked and echoed off the canyon walls, wild and close, and she heard Rourke shouting for his men to follow, his voice already receding as her horse fought for footing on ground that had never known a wagon road. "There is an old game trail through here," August called back to her, his own horse lunging up ahead of hers between 2 boulders that looked barely wide enough to pass. Cattle used it before the pass was ever cut wide enough for herds. Rourke's men do not know this valley the way I do. I spent 2 winters up here once before I ever bought the ranch, when I was still learning this country. The defile twisted and climbed for what felt like an hour but was likely only 20 minutes, brush tearing at Kate's skirt and sleeves, her horse lathered and blowing hard beneath her, the sound of pursuit falling away behind them as Rourke's riders, unfamiliar with the ground, lost the trail among the rocks below. At the top, the defile opened onto a narrow shelf of grass overlooking the whole notch, and it was there, finally, that August reined in and turned in his saddle to look back the way they had come, his chest heaving, a fine sheen of sweat on his face despite the coolness of the height. "They will not find this way up," he said. "Not without a guide who knows it, and none of Rourke's men do. We can follow this shelf north a few miles and come down well past the notch, onto the Fort Worth road beyond his reach." It was then that Kate saw the blood soaking dark through the shoulder of his shirt, spreading slow and steady down his arm, and her relief curdled instantly into fear. "You are shot," she said, already swinging down from her horse before he could argue otherwise. "It grazed me," August said, though the paleness beneath his sunburn told a different story. "It will keep until Fort Worth." "It will not," Kate said, already tearing a strip from the hem of her petticoat with hands that did not shake despite everything they had just outrun. "Sit down before you fall down, August Underwood, and let me look at it. I did not ride through that canyon to lose you to stubbornness on the other side of it." He obeyed her, which told her more than any argument could have how much the wound truly cost him, and she worked quickly, cleaning the furrow the bullet had plowed along the meat of his upper arm with water from her canteen, binding it tight with the strip of linen, her fingers steady even as her heart had not yet slowed from the climb. "You did not have to come up here after me," he said quietly, watching her work. "You could have stayed on the shelf and let me lead them off and ridden clear yourself." "I do not intend to make a habit of leaving people behind on this road," Kate said, tying off the bandage with more force than was strictly necessary. "My father wrote to me that he had found something wrong, and then he was dead before I ever answered his letter. I have had quite enough of arriving too late to help the people who matter to me." August caught her hand before she could pull away, holding it against the bandage, against the warmth of his own skin beneath it. "I matter to you," he said, and it was not entirely a question. "You matter to me," Kate confirmed, and something in her chest that had been clenched tight since the shot through the kitchen window 3 nights before finally loosened. "Which is exactly why we are not staying up here a moment longer than we must, so do not go getting ideas about this being the moment for anything but riding hard toward Fort Worth." He laughed, a low, startled sound, the first real laugh she had heard from him, and it did something to her resolve that the gunfire in the canyon below had not managed to touch. They rode north along the shelf for 2 more hours before the wound in his arm made itself known again, the exertion opening it beneath the bandage, until August swayed once in the saddle, catching himself before he fell only through sheer stubbornness. Kate called a halt in a stand of cottonwoods beside a thin creek, and there, Examining the wound properly in better light, she found what she had feared. The graze was deeper than either of them had first believed, and the fever building already in his skin told her infection was not far behind if it went untreated much longer. "You cannot ride hard again today," she said, kneeling beside him where he sat with his back against a tree trunk, his face gray with the effort of the last stretch of road. "And I cannot carry you to Fort Worth on a lathered horse and hope the fever waits for us to arrive." "Then you go on," August said, and though his voice was thick with pain, there was no hesitation in it. "Fort Worth is another day's ride from here if you push, less if you find the road easier than the Notch was. I will rest here, keep off the leg, and follow when I am able. Rourke's men do not know this creek, and I know 100 places to hide along it if they come looking. I am not leaving you shot and alone in the brush, August." "You are not leaving me," he said. "You are riding on with the only proof that will bring a marshal down on Rourke's whole operation before he thinks to come finish what he started in that pass. I have been shot before, Kate. I have not always had someone waiting on the other end of the road for me to come back to. This time I do, and that is worth more to me than my pride about being carried through this on my own 2 feet. Ride on. Find the marshal. I will be here when you come back for me, or I will meet you on the road, whichever comes first." She wanted to argue. She wanted, with a fierceness that surprised her, to stay beside him rather than ride on alone into a city she barely knew, carrying evidence that could get her killed if the wrong person intercepted her first. But she understood, looking at the gray exhaustion in his face and the steadiness of his eyes despite it, that he was right, and that arguing further would only cost them both the daylight they needed. "I will come back for you," she said, "with a marshal and a doctor both, and you had better be exactly where you say you will be when I do." "I will be counting the hours," he said, and reached up to touch her cheek with his good hand, a gesture so gentle after the violence of the day that it nearly undid her composure entirely. "Ride safe, Kate Keller. You are the bravest person I have ever known, and I have known some brave fools in my time." She kissed him then, quick and fierce, tasting salt and dust and the particular sweetness of a thing finally admitted after days of careful denial. And then she was up on her horse before either of them could turn it into a longer goodbye than the day allowed, riding north and east alone with her father's ledger and her own year of evidence in the saddlebag beneath her knee, toward a city she had visited only twice before, and a marshal she had never met. The ride to Fort Worth took the rest of that day and half the next, Kate pushing her horse as hard as she dared without ruining it, stopping only twice, once at a lonely trailside store to water the animal and buy a bit of dried beef to keep herself going, and once at a small ranch, where a startled but kindly rancher's wife let her rest 3 hours in the shade of a barn before continuing on. She rode through the crowded traffic of the Western Trail's spur roads, past freight wagons and other trail crews pushing their own herds toward the Kansas railheads, and she was aware, every mile of it, of how alone she was, and of how much depended on her reaching the city before Ledbetter or Rourke thought to send word ahead to cover their tracks. Fort Worth, when she finally rode into it near dusk on the second day, sprawled busy and loud along the bluffs above the Trinity River, its streets crowded with the traffic of the Texas and Pacific Railway Depot, cattle buyers and bankers and freight agents all moving in the particular hurry of a town that had decided to become a city. She found the office of the United States Marshal on her first asking, a squat brick building near the courthouse square, and she walked in still road-dusted and saddle-sore, her father's ledger clutched against her chest, and told the deputy at the desk that she needed to see the marshal immediately regarding federal fraud and an armed assault on a public road. The deputy, to his credit, did not laugh at her or send her away to wash first. Something in her face, she supposed, or in the exhaustion and urgency plain in her voice, convinced him this was not a woman to be dismissed, and within the half-hour she was seated across a wide oak desk from Marshal Cole Ashby, a broad, weathered man with a graying beard and eyes that missed very little, laying out her father's ledger, her own notebook, and her account of the last 2 weeks in as steady a voice as she could manage. Ashby listened without interrupting, turning the ledger's pages himself when she reached that part of the account, holding the forged entry up to the lamp to examine the ink more closely, comparing it against the surrounding pages in a way that told her he had done this kind of comparison before. "This ink is fresher than the rest of the book by a good margin," he said finally. "Any competent examiner of documents will say the same in a courtroom. And you say Ledbetter as good as admitted to you what he was doing, with no one else present to hear it." "He did," Kate said. "And Silas Rourke ambushed us in Comanche Notch not 2 days ago, in company with 3 other armed men, when he learned we were carrying evidence toward Fort Worth. My companion was shot in that encounter and remains along the trail north of the Notch, unable to travel quickly, while I rode ahead alone with the proof." Ashby's eyebrows rose slightly at that. "You rode alone through Rourke country carrying evidence that would hang a federal examiner and break up his whole toll operation, after being ambushed once already." "I did not see a great deal of choice in the matter," Kate said. "My father is dead because of what these men have been doing in Larkspur, Marshal Ashby. I do not intend to let his death, or the risk my companion has taken on my behalf, come to nothing for want of one more day's hard riding." Something in Ashby's face shifted then, respect settling into the weathered lines of it in a way that made her realize, for the first time since she had walked into his office, that he believed her entirely. "I have had my own suspicions about Warren Ledbetter for the better part of a year," he said. 3 towns along this trail have reported land irregularities following his audits, and I have never had proof solid enough to act on, only smoke. You have brought me fire, Miss Keller. I will telegraph the controller's office tonight, and I will ride for Larkspur myself at first light with as many deputies as I can muster by morning. Your companion, you say, is along the creek north of Comanche Notch. We will find him on the way." "I am riding with you," Kate said, before he could suggest otherwise. Ashby studied her a moment, and whatever he saw in her face must have satisfied him, because he did not argue. "I would not have thought to leave you behind," he said. "You have earned your place in this as much as any deputy on my payroll, and a good deal more than most." They rode out before dawn the next morning, 8 of them in all, hard and fast along the road Kate had traveled alone the day before, and it was mid-afternoon when they reached the creek where she had left August, her heart climbing into her throat as they approached the stand of cottonwoods, and she saw, for one terrible moment, no sign of him at all among the trees. Then he rose from where he had been resting in the shade, thinner and paler than she remembered but upright, and the relief that went through her was so complete she nearly wept before the marshal's men. "You came back," he said, as she swung down and crossed to him without any thought for the audience of deputies watching. "I told you I would," she said, and did not care who saw her put her arms around him, careful of the bandaged shoulder, holding on as though letting go might undo the whole hard distance she had ridden to reach this moment. There was little time for more than that. Ashby's deputies got August onto a spare horse, his wound cleaned and freshly bandaged by a doctor's kit one of the men carried, and the whole party pushed on toward Larkspur that same afternoon, arriving as the sun was setting behind the town's low roofline, the streets still busy with trail hands finishing their day's business, unaware of what the dust of 8 riders coming in from the Fort Worth road was about to mean for their town. They found Warren Ledbetter still at the bank, going over the books by lamplight as though nothing in the world had changed since the night Kate had caught him at the same task, and his face, when Marshal Ashby walked in with a federal warrant already drawn and Kate Keller standing at his shoulder with her father's ledger in hand, went the color of old ash. "This is an outrage," Ledbetter began, rising from the desk. "I am a commissioned officer of the Controller of the Currency, and I will not be treated as a common criminal on the word of on the word of a woman whose handwriting you forged into a dead man's ledger, and whom you as good as threatened when she caught you at it. Ashby said, his voice hard and final in a way that left no room for the rest of Ledbetter's sentence. "I have got the ledger, Mr. Ledbetter, and I have got a document examiner in Fort Worth who will testify to fresh ink over old, and I expect once we start pulling at this thread, we will find a good deal more unraveling behind it than one forged entry in Larkspur. You are under arrest on federal charges of fraud against a national bank's trust records and conspiracy in the falsification of public land documents." Ledbetter's eyes flicked once, desperately, toward the door, and Kate saw the calculation of a man weighing flight against the certainty of being run down before he had gone 100 yards through a town full of deputies. Whatever fight had been in him drained visibly away, and he sat back down without further protest, the mild, confident mask of the last 2 weeks gone entirely, leaving behind only a tired, frightened man who had gambled on his commission being enough to protect him forever, and had lost. Sheriff Bragg proved less composed when Ashby's men found him at his own office an hour later. He tried, briefly, to claim ignorance of the whole scheme, but the ledger of bribes Ledbetter had unwisely kept in his own hotel room, seized in the same hour, told a different story, his own name appearing against a dozen dated payments over the past 2 years, and by full dark he too sat in the same makeshift jail cell as the examiner he had protected, both men's futures reduced now to whatever mercy a federal court might extend them. Silas Rourke did not surrender so easily. Word of the arrests reached Comanche Notch before midnight, carried by a rider Ledbetter's clerk had sent out in a last, desperate bid for warning, and by the time Ashby's posse rode for the pass at dawn, Rourke had gathered what men remained loyal to him at the Notch's narrow mouth, plainly intending to make a stand rather than run. August, still weak from his wound but unwilling to be left behind this time, rode with them, and it was his knowledge of the ground, the same knowledge that had saved his and Kate's lives days before, that let Ashby's men circle above the Notch along the old game trail and come down on Rourke's position from the high ground, rather than riding into the same trap that had nearly cost Kate and August their lives. The fight, when it came, was short and largely bloodless, 3 of Rourke's 4 remaining riders throwing down their arms the moment they saw deputies above them on both flanks, recognizing a lost position for what it was. Rourke himself fired one wild shot toward the ridge before a deputy's return fire caught him in the leg, dropping him hard against the rocks, cursing and beaten but alive, and it was August who climbed down to him first, looking at the man who had once been his captain in a life he had spent 9 years trying to outrun. "It did not have to end this way, Silas," August said quietly, standing over him while Ashby's men moved in to bind his wound and his hands both. "It never does until it does," Rourke said, and there was no apology in it, only the flat resignation of a man who had always known, somewhere beneath his confidence, that this day would come eventually. "You always were too careful to be any good at this life, Coburn. Should have known you would land on your feet somewhere respectable." "My name is Underwood," August said, and turned and walked back up the slope to where Kate waited and did not look back again. The days that followed unspooled with the particular strange quiet that follows any storm, Larkspur's streets full of talk of little else but the arrests. The bank temporarily shuttered, while federal auditors from the comptroller's office went through every page of its trust ledgers, and Cyrus Prout, terrified of being swept up in the same net as Ledbetter and Bragg, confessing everything he knew to Marshal Ashby within a day of the arrests, laying out in careful, frightened detail exactly how the sale of Thomas Keller's ranch to August Underwood had been arranged, the false claim of a lapsed patent, the money moved through the bank's trust account to make the whole transaction appear legitimate. It was Marshal Ashby himself who sat down with Kate and August a week later in the newly reopened land office to settle the question of the ranch that had started the whole affair. "The patent Kate Keller holds is the true and original one," Ashby said, laying both documents on Prout's desk between them, Prout himself hovering nervously nearby, eager to demonstrate his cooperation now that his career and possibly his freedom depended on it. Thomas Keller's claim never lapsed. The reversion was manufactured, the sale to Mr. Underwood built on a lie neither he nor I am satisfied Cyrus Prout fully understood at the time. By law, Miss Keller, the section is yours, and Mr. Underwood's payment for it was money paid into a fraudulent scheme he had no knowledge of joining. Kate looked at August across the desk, and saw in his face the same thing she had felt settle into her own chest the moment Ashby finished speaking. Not triumph, not relief exactly, but a kind of weary sorrow at a victory that seemed, for a moment, to cost one of them everything. "I do not want it that way," she said, before August could speak, before the silence could harden into the kind of loss neither of them could undo. "Marshal Ashby, is there a lawful way for a landholder to convey a portion of her claim, or to enter into partnership over it, once her title is confirmed clear?" Ashby's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. "There is. Once your patent is confirmed and recorded, the land is entirely yours to do with as you see fit. You could sell a portion, lease it, or enter partnership with whomever you choose." "Then I choose to keep the whole of it," Kate said, and turned to August with a smile that trembled only slightly at the corners. "On the condition that the man who has worked it faithfully for 3 years and nearly bled out defending it stays on to run it with me, not as a hired hand and not as a squatter either, but as an equal partner in every sense the law and the church both will allow." August stared at her a long moment, and something in his throat worked before he found his voice. "You are asking me to marry you, Kate Keller, in the middle of a land office, with Cyrus Prout for a witness." "I am asking you to marry me," Kate agreed, "because I have ridden through a canyon ambush with you, and watched you bleed for evidence that was not even yours to protect, and sat across a kitchen table while you told me the worst of yourself unasked. And I find I would rather build whatever comes next beside you than divide a ranch between two people who have already decided they cannot bear to be parted from it, or from each other. Though if you would rather I asked more romantically, I am willing to try again somewhere with fewer land agents present." "No," August said, and the smile that broke across his face then was the widest she had yet seen him give, unguarded entirely for the first time since she had known him. "No, this will do fine. I have spent 9 years building a life quiet enough that nobody would ever think to ask what I used to be. I did not expect, at the end of it, to find someone who already knew the worst and wanted the rest anyway. Yes, Kate. I will marry you, and I will run that ranch with you until neither one of us can sit a horse anymore, and I will consider myself the luckiest man in Texas for the privilege of it." Cyrus Prout, watching from behind his desk, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Should I record something regarding this, or is this a private matter?" "Record the patent confirmation first," Kate said, laughing despite herself, "and we will see about the rest through the proper church and county channels in good time." The proper channels, as it happened, did not take long. They were married 3 weeks later in the small frame church at the edge of Larkspur, the same building where half the town had gathered days before to watch Warren Leadbitter and Otis Bragg loaded onto a wagon under federal guard, bound for trial in Fort Worth. And the contrast struck Kate, standing at the front of the church in a dress borrowed from the rancher's wife who had sheltered her on her ride to Fort Worth, as exactly the kind of justice her father would have wanted to see. The town's grief and fear giving way, in the same short season, to a wedding. August waited for her at the front in a new shirt that still showed the crease marks of the mercantile shelf, his arm healed enough now that he no longer favored it, though a scar would remain there for the rest of his life. A mark he wore, he told her later, without any shame at all, since it had been earned protecting something worth far more than the pain of it. Marshal Ashby himself rode down from Fort Worth to stand as a witness, having taken, he admitted with some embarrassment, a rather personal interest in seeing the matter through to its proper conclusion after everything Kate had risked to bring him the evidence that broke Rourke's whole operation. He brought news with him as well. The federal prosecutor's office, weighing August's old offenses against the Kansas gang from nearly a decade before, against the total absence of any surviving witness willing or able to testify to a specific crime, and against the considerable weight of his conduct in helping bring down Rourke and Ledbetter both, had quietly decided there was no case worth pursuing against a man who had spent 9 years building an honest life, and had, in the end, risked that life to help end a fraud that had cost other honest men their land, and in Thomas Keller's case, his life entirely. "The matter is closed," Ashby told him plainly the day before the wedding. "So far as the federal government is concerned, Wade Coburn does not exist anymore, so far as I am concerned either, except as a name in a report nobody has any further reason to open. You are August Underwood, rancher, of Larkspur, Texas, and I expect that is the only name that will matter to anyone from here forward." August had not spoken for a long moment after that, standing in the yard of the ranch that was now, by every measure of law and love both, as much his as Kate's, and when Kate had asked him gently what he was thinking, he had said only, "That I did not think a man got to put a whole life down and pick up a better one, not really, not all at once like this. I have been carrying Wade Coburn on my back for 9 years, waiting for him to catch up to me. It is a strange, light feeling to set him down at last." The wedding itself was small and plain, as suited a town still catching its breath from scandal, but it was warm in the way that mattered. The church filled with ranchers and drovers and merchants who had come to respect both of them through the whole strange, dangerous season. Cyrus Prout, sitting near the back looking as though he still could not quite believe he had escaped his own foolishness with nothing worse than a stern federal reprimand, and the loss of his position, which Ashby had seen to personally, replacing him with a register less easily frightened into complicity. Kate's father was not there to walk her down the short aisle of the little church, and she felt the absence of him keenly in the quiet moment before the ceremony began, but she carried his ledger with her that day nonetheless, tucked beneath her arm as she had carried it through every danger of the past weeks. A strange and fitting thing to bring to a wedding, perhaps, but she found she wanted him there in the only way left to her, and when August saw it under her arm as she came to stand beside him, he only reached over and took her free hand without a word, understanding entirely without needing to be told. "Your father would have liked this ending," he murmured to her, while the minister arranged his notes, "better than the one Rourke and Ledbetter had planned for all of us." "He would have liked you," Kate said. "He wrote once, in that very ledger, that he hoped I would someday find a partner who valued honest work over easy comfort. I did not think, when I first read that line, that I would find him on the very land my father died trying to protect." They said their vows beneath the plain wooden cross at the front of the little church, the June light coming warm and gold through the open windows, the sound of a distant herd still moving along the trail outside, a faint, familiar music beneath the minister's words. And when August kissed her at the end of it, unhurried and certain in a way that held nothing back, Kate understood that whatever the wild, dangerous country beyond Larkspur streets still held in store for two people who had chosen each other in the middle of a fraud and a gunfight both, she would rather face all of it beside this man than face anything easier alone. They rode back to the ranch that evening as husband and wife, the herd still crowding the trail south of town, drovers calling friendly greetings as they passed, and the house that had once been the center of a bitter dispute over two conflicting deeds stood waiting for them now as simply, finally, home. Kate set her father's ledger on the kitchen shelf that night, beside a fresh, blank one she had bought in Fort Worth to begin their own accounts, ranch and marriage both, and she thought, watching August bank the fire against the cooling night, that some stories ended exactly where they ought to. Not with everything they had lost restored, for her father would not come back, and the 9 years August had spent running from Wade Coburn's mistakes could not be given back to him either, but with something new and worth keeping built carefully atop the wreckage of what had come before. They spoke, in the quiet months that followed, of children someday, of a ranch house grown noisy with a family neither of them had quite dared hope for through the hardest weeks of that summer, though they agreed, comfortable in the unhurried patience they had learned to build between them, that such things would come in their own good time, not forced ahead of the life they were only just beginning to build together. For now it was enough, Kate found, to wake each morning beside a man who had once ridden through gunfire to buy her the time she needed to ride free, and to know that whatever came next, in a country still wild enough to demand courage of anyone who meant to make a home in it, she would not be facing it alone again. Not ever. Not so long as August Underwood drew breath beside her. The bank in Larkspur reopened under new management within the month, its trust ledgers audited clean by a controller's examiner who had no history with Sela's work or any interest in becoming one, and the toll road through Comanche Notch, cleared at last of the men who had preyed upon it, filled that summer and every summer after with the ordinary, honest traffic of cattle and wagons and travelers, who no longer needed to fear the shadows between its narrow walls. Kate wrote the whole story for her paper in Austin, every true and difficult part of it, save only the particulars of August's old name, which she judged, and Marshal Ashby agreed, belonged to no one now but the dead past it had been buried with. The article ran under her own byline, the first time in her career she had signed a piece with her full name rather than initials alone, and when the copies reached Larkspur 3 weeks later, August read it twice through by lamplight, and told her quietly that her father would have been prouder of that piece of writing than of anything else she might ever put to paper, because it had cost her more than any story before it, and told the truth anyway. Warren Leadbitter and Otis Bragg were tried and convicted that autumn in the federal court at Fort Worth, their sentences long enough to satisfy even Kate's hardest feelings about her father's death, though no verdict, she knew, would ever truly balance that particular scale. Sela's work, once his leg healed enough to stand trial, went to the same court and the same fate, his gang scattered or jailed alongside him, and the road through Comanche Notch passed, at last, entirely out of the shadow he had cast over it for so many years. And on the ranch that had once been the subject of two conflicting deeds, Kate Keller Underwood and August Underwood built, through that first hard summer and every season after, exactly the kind of life her father had hoped for her and August had never quite believed he deserved. Honest, hard one, and entirely, gratefully their own.